Hayom, Chaf Chet Tammuz, Taf Shin Pei, Zehayom, Asa Adonai, Nagila Venismecha Bo. Okay, so we are, it's all about relationships, right? And we have, this is your specialty. And that quote, it's all about relationships, I heard in a lecture by someone, Moti Bar-On, that told about a meeting between him and the Dalai Lama, that he was in Dharamsala, and they were talking about Judaism and about Buddhism. And Moti said about Judaism, it's all about relationships. And the Dalai Lama said, here we part, in terms of the process of the process of achieving awakening, enlightenment. Buddhism is very much a individual process, and the focus on relationships is gets to the heart of Jewish life and Judaism. In fact, even when we talk about the divine, about God, God could be Father in heaven. The Shekhinah could even be a feminine mother figure. In the Song of Songs, we talk about a relationship of lovers. Another statement that captures this point, I think, would be Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, who I know that the two of you so much admire, about when he was once asked about what's the essence of being Jewish, and his answer was community. And he was asked by the people in the audience, the elite of English society, what's community? And he said, community is a place that when you're not there, people miss you. And Gershon and Gila, we miss you here. And a place when people come back, we're so happy to see them. And Rabbi Sacks said there was an uncomfortable silence as he saw that people were thinking, do I have a community? Okay. Now the reason why this is very apropos, because I thought to talk about tonight, ideas and stories connecting to, it's all about relationships. And this is appropriate because now we're in what's in the 3 weeks, between the 3 weeks of mourning every year for about the destruction of the second temple, the Beit HaMikdash. And the Talmud teaches us that the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash was all about relationships. It says because of sinat chinam, because of the hatred between people that led to the destruction of the temple, of the Beit HaMikdash. In fact, there's a very famous statement by Rav Kook that Rav Kook says that as the second temple was destroyed because of hatred, it will have to be rebuilt based on love. And gets to the heart of it is that the presence of the divine in the world is in that place of human relationships. It's in the place of relationships that we link and we connect, and that's where the divine is found. The Talmud already says that about relationships between husband and wife, that the place of the Shekhinah, Ish Visha Zachu, a man and a woman, if they are privileged, Shekhinah B'nehem, the divine is between them. But the Zohar takes this about all human relations. And again, I think I mentioned this in the series already, but I'll repeat it because it's things that are important should be repeated. That on the pasuk, Hine matov v'manayim shevet achim gam yachad, how good and pleasant is it for brothers to be together. There's an extra word there, gam, also. How good and pleasant is it for brothers to be also together. And the word also is really redundant and extra. So the Zohar says it comes to teach us that when God sees people together with love and connection, he says, me too, also. I also want to be there. So when there's love between us, then the temple will be built in that space, sacred space between us. And when there's hatred between us, then the temple will be destroyed. Now, there's a famous story which apparently nobody knows really where it came from. Certainly it's not mentioned in the Talmud, but about the place in which the temple was built. And that legend says that there were two brothers, and one of them had a lot of children, and the other one didn't have any children at all. And one brother said, my brother, he has no children. There's no one to help him, to support him. He needs more. So every night that brother would try to sneak into his brother's field and bring some extra grain, because my brother, he needs it so much. But at the same time, the brother without the children said, I don't have any children. It's just myself, my wife's mouths to feed. My brother has so many children. He needs more. And every night he would sneak over to his brother's field to bring bushels of grain. And neither could figure out, when they'd wake up in the morning, they had just as much as they started. Till one night they meet each other, they realize what's happening, and they hug each other, and a voice comes out from heaven and says, here the Bet HaMikdash will be built. Now, this story, no one knows where it comes from. It could be some ancient folk tale, Jewish or not Jewish, but it does capture this point about the place of the divine in the world is in that place of the relationships. Now, and talking about relationships, so maybe, and if we're talking a little bit about, first of all, I think this story, now we would say, more than talking about relations between brothers, it's really about a couple relationship. Because we know that couples, first of all, I think it's a postmodern story. You have two brothers. Each one feels the other needs more. Now, who's right? Now, there's obviously not a question about right and wrong. It's two perspectives on this reality. So it says that there's more than one narrative to look at the situation. Now, this reality of two people whose lives are connected, and there are two narratives how to look at this relationship, it's very much about couplehood, about a couple that live together and often have their two vantage points how to look at things. And a couple that's blessed is each one, instead of looking at things through their egoistic way, will be able to cross the bridge and see things from their partner's approach. So maybe this brings us to this beautiful insight about chuppah, about a Jewish wedding is under a chuppah. Chuppah is a covering. And there's an insight of Rav Shlomo Carlebach about what a chuppah is all about. And certainly Gershon and Gila, we're hoping that you'll finish the process of Gerut and we'll all be at your wonderful chuppah. And Rav Shlomo Carlebach says that chuppah comes to rectify the sin of the Garden of Eden. Okay, now the question is, what was the sin in the Garden of Eden? Now, some people think it was about eating the forbidden fruit. Now, that really, they shouldn't have done that, but there was something really serious that took place over there. And that was that after God confronted Adam and said, what happened? Now, he knew that his wife was in big trouble. So, if he did what he should have done, he really should have said, oh, please, spare my wife. Do whatever you want to me, but have mercy on my wife. If that's what he said, God would have forgiven both of them. But instead he said, it's not my fault, it's her fault. And after that, they were no longer in the Garden of Eden. So The sin in Eden was they should have covered up for each other, right? I don't know in Holland what to say. In English in America, when someone's in big trouble, you try to cover up for them, right? So they should have tried to cover up. Okay, same over there. Great. Now, in covering up, okay, so it's all about. So a chuppah is a covering. It's saying we're going to cover up for each other. And under the chuppah, when the husband gives the ring to the wife, he says, I am makadesh you kedat Moshe Yisrael, according to the way of Moses and the Jewish people. And what's the way of Moses and the Jewish people? The Jewish people were getting into trouble all the time. And Moshe was there covering up for them. He said, God, if you cut off a connection with them, take me out of your book. So this is a real relationship, which is not about ego, which is not about love that you try to service yourself, but love that you are devoted and caring about the other. Okay? And maybe this brings us to another story about love, about the primary rule of the Torah, v'ahavta l'recha kamocha. And again, this is one of the stories which kind of starts with lots of tears, and maybe even ends with some tears, but I'll share it with you because I think it's certainly very deep and important story. That, as you know, we're neighbors in Otniel to the Meir family, and 4 years ago, a terrorist came and in the home murdered Daphna Meir, and this was very traumatic in the community. The terrible murder in front of the children, and the sirens went off, and everyone was in the homes. But the day of the funeral, we went to the funeral, and from the burial, we continued the community to a wedding. There was one of the young women in the community of Otniel was married the same day as the funeral. And the people that went to the funeral were the people that went to the wedding. And I had the responsibility to be the rabbi who performed the wedding. And I went straight from the graveyard in Jerusalem to where the wedding was. And I'm thinking, how to do this wedding. And I come to the wedding, and first, under the chuppah, another young woman gets up who had been recently married and said that before her wedding, she was really troubled and concerned and worried about all sorts of different things. And Daphna Meir sent her a text message saying, God created the world. It's his problem. He has to take care of these things. You don't have to worry your pretty head about these matters. And said that was something that really calmed her down. So she said this under the chuppah. And then I had a moment of inspiration. I went up and I said that this morning we were all so broken because we deeply felt that commandment of the Torah of v'ahavta l'recha kamocha, loving others as ourselves. And we so deeply felt that, so our hearts went out and were broken with the suffering of the Meir family. But now we're at the wedding, and that same power of empathy and connection of v'ahavta l'recha kamocha, now we're going to use this to connect to the bride and the groom and have this wedding be filled with joy. And then I added that the Ari HaKadosh, the great Kabbalist of the 16th century, he said two things about v'ahavta. First of all, he said that the primary place in which we fulfill that commandment of v'ahavta l'recha kamocha is in the love relationship between a husband and wife. So I said to the young couple, now you are beginning the place that you could fully fulfill the Ahavta. And second of all, the Ari said that every single day we should begin the day by accepting upon ourselves the mitzvah of v'ahavta l'recha kamocha. And he even wrote a special formula to accept this mitzvah upon ourselves. So I said to this young couple, if every morning we should take this upon ourselves, what better way to begin the wedding that for you, the Chatan, and you, the Kala, and everybody here in the audience, let us all say together the formula of the Ari HaKadosh, accepting upon ourselves the commandment, loving each other as ourselves with our whole totality. I'll say it now in Hebrew. Harei ani mikabel al atzmi et mitzvat aseh shel v'ahavta l'recha kamocha. Le'ahov kol echad ve'echad b'Yisrael kenafshi ukemodi. And since then, every wedding that I've done, I've always asked everybody to say together, the Chatan, the Kala, and everybody, this v'ahavta, to always begin the wedding with this primary mitzvah. Okay, so this is the this is the teaching of v'ahavta l'recha kamocha that from the depths of sadness and a broken heart is something that takes me to every wedding, every simcha. Now maybe on this another story to connect up to v'ahavta l'recha kamocha, another very moving but also traumatic moment for all of Israeli society was in 2014 when 3 boys were kidnapped and ultimately killed by terrorists. And at the funerals, the first part were held separately, and at the same time, in one place, one of the rabbis, Rav Dov Zinger, who was the Rosh Yeshiva of the yeshiva where 2 of the boys had studied. And at that point, my sons also were studying that yeshiva, Makor Chaim. And at the same time, the leader of Israel's primary secular party came to a West Bank settlement, which usually the left is against all the Jews living in Judea and Samaria, and a religious settlement, and they both spoke. And incredibly, not knowing what the other would speak about, they both spoke about the same thing. They both said, we have, Rav Yair Lapid, the leading secularist in Israel, he said, we could choose hatred and revenge, or we could choose to open our hearts in love to each other. And Rabbi Dov Zinger was saying, what's the Jewish people? 2 Jews, 3 opinions, but 1 heart. And both of them ended their speech by saying, quoting the holy Ari, and saying, let us all say together this formula to accept upon ourselves the mitzvah of v'ahavta l'recha kamocha, to love each other as ourselves. Okay, so these are stories of v'ahavta. And maybe we'll close today by something by another story, maybe to close the story of the weddings, about, we know at the end of a Jewish wedding, they break a cup, and which is really amazing. It's 2,000 years of loyalty to Yerushalayim, and it's this loyalty that with the grace of God, we have returned to the land of Israel and to Yerushalayim, to Jerusalem. But there's a really beautiful story that I heard from friends of mine about the breaking of the cup. My friends of mine have a common friend who was one of the Jews who was evicted from his home from Gush Katif, which 15 years ago. And this was part of a belief of the Israeli government at the time that by separating Jews and Arabs and having the Jews leaving Gaza, this would lead to a better situation for both sides, which unfortunately hasn't been the case. But regardless of whether this was the right or wrong thing, this created a tremendous amount of human anguish as the thousands of Jews living in Gaza were taken out of their homes. Now, the person telling the story is Rabbi Dror Aryeh, a friend of friends of mine. And he says that he's reading this book about Shlomo Carlebach, who says that why is it that we break a cup under the chuppah? And Shlomo Carlebach says it's to teach us it's so hard to build things, but it's so easy to break them. Now, and Rabbi Dror says, this is my story. It took a tractor half an hour to destroy my home. But now, for so many years, I'm trying to build a new home. And there's so much bureaucracy. And he's so frustrated. And, okay, wow, we have Carol joining us. Carol, thanks for joining us. I'm so happy you joined us.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, good to see you. And I'm so sorry last week if you
no, it's okay, not a
missed the class.
problem.
Okay,
It's okay.
but in your honor, so this is a very deep and holy story. So I'm sorry, Gershon and Gila will forgive me if I start again at the beginning. Okay, this is a story I heard from a friend of friends of mine that he was one of the thousands of Jews that were evicted from their homes exactly 15 years ago, now in the summer, by Gush Katif, as part of a hope that somehow by separating Jews and Arabs, that this would help promote peace between us. This didn't happen. But regardless, it created a lot of anguish, and certainly by the Jews who were evicted forcefully from their homes. Now, the person telling the story, Rav Dror Aryeh, he said one Friday night, he's reading a book about insights by Rav Shlomo Carlebach. And this is a book that has a lot of teachings about weddings. And in it, he says, why is it that we break a cup under the chuppah at a Jewish wedding? And Rav Shlomo says, this comes to teach us it's so hard to build things, but it's so easy to break them. So something we want the new couple to know, we want everybody to know. It's so hard to build things. It's so easy to break them. Now, and Rav Dror says, this is my story. It took a tractor half an hour to demolish my home in Gush Katif. And now for years and years, I'm trying to build a new home. And the bureaucracy is so devastating that I'm constantly getting stuck. And the last thing that's really stopping him is the electric company has not been doing what they should do to connect his new plot of land to the electric grid that will allow him to start rebuilding a home in the new location. He said, you know what? I'm not going to give in. Tomorrow, I'm going to the electric company, and I'm not going to give in until I know I'm getting the electricity I need. So he decides he's going to leave early. He's going to come till the electric company closes at, let's say, 4. He's going to come in at 3, and he's not going to leave till they promise to get the electricity for him. So he shows up at 3, and there's a sign. We're sorry, but today we're closing at 2 o'clock. and he's overwhelmed with frustration. He's not going to give in. We have Gershon and Gila who have dealt with the Israeli bureaucracy. There's a lot of beautiful things in Israel, but there's some bureaucracy things that really could make it challenging to try to come and live in the Holy Land. And he's totally at wit's end. And he says, I'm not going to give in. He bursts into the electric company's offices and finds somebody to listen to his pain and frustration. But everything's closed till finally he gets to some office and he bursts in and says, do you know why they break a cup under the chuppah? And the people there look at him in astonishment and say, what? And he says, do you know why they break a cup under the chuppah? And they say, why? But then right away he starts talking about his electricity. And the person says, don't worry, you're going to get your electricity. Tell us, why is it that they break the cup under the chuppah? And Rav Dror says, to teach us. It's so hard to build things, but it's so easy to destroy them. And then there's a woman there, and she breaks out crying. And the man turns to Rav Dror and says, you're gonna get, don't worry, I promise you, you're gonna get your electricity. I am the head of the electric company's southern branch. But right now I'm talking with my secretary. And today she came in and I know she was engaged, but for all sorts of reasons, she decided to break it off. And I think she's making a really big mistake. It's not for the right reasons. And we've been talking about this, and suddenly you burst in and say that we break a cup to teach us that it's so hard to build things, so hard to destroy things. So easy to destroy things. Thank you, Yunon. This is my best advisor, Yunon. And they start talking together, and they realize that really it's a deep connection, and it's really for all the wrong reasons. And the head of the company says, none of us is going anywhere. They call the fiancé, they wait for him, he comes, and they decide that they're gonna go do it together. They're gonna reconnect. And then they start talking to Rabbi Aryeh, and they say, yeah, we had a date, we had a hall, we have everything. The only thing we're missing for the wedding is we didn't have a rabbi. And Dror says, I'm a rabbi. And ultimately, he did the wedding, and under the chuppah, he shared with them this story about the cup. It's such a deep teaching about life. It's so hard to build things, but so easy to break them. And at first, I was thinking of stopping a little bit early, but I really owe to Caro, because last time I was a no-show. So we'll continue a bit longer. And I thought something very appropriate is teachings from this week's Parsha, Parshat Dvarim, that talk about what's called, if we're talking about, it's all about relationships and the complexity of relationships. I would say the topic of Parshat Dvarim is that of, in Hebrew, tochacha, rebuking, the need to sometimes to give criticism and rebuke to one another. Now, interestingly, the pasuk that we spoke so much about today, V'ahavta l'recha kamocha, in the Bible appears in the book of Vayikra right next to the pasuk of Hocheach Tochiach et Amitecha, the two mitzvot, to love each other and to rebuke each other, appear together. And we know that so much this often is not the case, that usually rebuking each other brings often not to connection and love, but to disconnection. Now, I think this week's Parsha, Parshat Dvarim, in which Moshe rebukes the children of Israel, is a masterpiece about what's the right way to give constructive criticism to each other. And there's so much to learn, and so much we should learn about even the helpful advice and critical advice that we give to each other, how this could connect us and not disconnect us. So first of all, this week's Parsha teaches us one thing. First of all, timing is everything. The Parsha begins right after the children of Israel have a succession of great victories. Great victories take place. Things are really up. If you want to give criticism to somebody, don't give it when they're down. When somebody's down, they need encouragement. The time to give criticism is when people think are going well, that they're strong enough, that things are going well enough, that this won't devastate them, but it will allow them to grow. It's also a good time because this is right before entering the land of Israel. At the beginning of things, it's much easier to correct things, to start the right way and not the wrong way. When you're in the middle of things, it's so hard to break out of patterns. So first of all, do it when things are going well. Do it at the beginning. And also, Moses, he knows, and the Jewish people know that he's about to step down. And he's about to die even. And this again, when parting, this is another time that the hearts are open. So first of all, give criticism when at the right timing is everything. But another important issue is when, is to who to give criticism. Incredibly, in the 40 years of the desert, we very little hear about the criticism of Moshe to Am Yisrael. Now we have a new generation, and suddenly, who gets all the criticism about the sins that took place when they left Egypt? This is a new generation. The people that did it, they didn't get the blame. This is 40 years later. These are the children of those people, and they're getting all the critique about what happened 40 years ago. But again, what's the point? The point is the people that left Egypt, it could be slave mentality, whatever they went through. For them, they didn't have the capacity to accept this criticism. Now it's a new generation. They could take it. They could learn from it. So they're the ones who hear the criticism. And there's another important law in the Talmud that just like there's a mitzvah to give criticism to those who could take it, who will listen to you, it's also a mitzvah to have the self-control and not to give criticism to those that will not listen to you. Because if they're not going to listen to you, it'll just lead to bad energies and disconnection. There's a Hasidic story about one night in middle of the winter. A famous rabbi comes with his assistant to visit this big banker. They knock on the door. The banker comes in his pajamas, and the rabbi, he invites them into the office. The rabbi sits in the office for a few minutes and doesn't say a word. After a few minutes, he says, "Thank you," gets up and leaves. This is a story I read by Rabbi Joseph Talishkin. And the banker is totally confused. He runs out into the cold of the winter and says to the rabbi, why did you come to my office? And the rabbi says, I did it to fulfill the mitzvah of rebuke, of tochacha. But the banker says, but you didn't say anything. He says, yes, because part of the mitzvah is to have self-control and not give rebuke when you know the person's not going to listen to you. He goes, what do you mean? How do you know I'm not going to listen to you? And he said, I know you. You're not going to listen to me. And the banker says, no, try me. He says, okay, I'll try you. There's this widow that can't pay her mortgage, and you're gonna throw her out of her home in the middle of the winter. How could you do this? And the banker starts saying, oh, I'm sorry. You have to understand, it's not my money. So the rabbi says, I knew it. You wouldn't accept my rebuke. But in order to show that the rabbi is not in the right, of course, so we know that ultimately the banker, out of his own pocket, found a way that the widow would not have to be driven out of her home in the winter. And maybe one last comment for Judo. How do you pronounce your name? Our most recent visitor to the shiur?
Gidon.
Gidon, okay. So I'm sorry, you're just with us just for the end. We're talking now, and with this we're going to end about when giving rebuke to each other, how can we do this in a way that this will connect us and not disconnect us? So I once found a wonderful guideline. If you want to give, Gidon, if you want to give the rebuke to the other, don't do it. Because if you really want to give this rebuke, that means it very likely is coming out of your ego, that you're angry at the other person. And if it's coming from a place of anger, your rebuke is not going to do anything for, it's just going to lead to disconnection. But when will it work? If you dread, if you don't want to give the rebuke, but you know it's really the right thing to do. The other person, he really has to hear these things. And even though you're embarrassed and you dread doing it and you have to brace yourself, but you do it anyway, here it means you're doing it not because of your anger, not because of your ego, but you truly care about the other person. And the hope is words that come out of the heart will go into the heart. Okay, so today we spoke about relationships, about v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, about weddings, about breaking a cup under the chuppah, and really about tochacha, and about it's such a need to be able to give criticism to each other, to receive criticism from each other, but it is such an art. It's an art to know how to give it and an art to know how to receive it. But Gidon, since you join us, we have to add something. So please, raise some sort of a point that we could respond to. We have Gershon and Gila, who are masters in everything related to our topic today about relationships. They are deep and deepening scholars about Judaism. So Gidon, let's find something to talk for about a few minutes before we end.
No problem. I can see in YouTube tomorrow. It's I have with my kids.
So first, tell us a few things about yourself, which is the word. So I'm Yaakov. I'm little Yishuv in Otniel.
Well,
I'm here with my son Yinon, right? He's always giving me wonderful advice. And in the background, if you don't know, we have Gershon and Gila, who are dear friends, originally from Holland, now in Otniel, but they're spending the summer in Norway. But Gidon, where are you from? Tell us a few words about yourself.
I met Aliyah 11 months ago from Argentina.
Wonderful. Welcome.
I live in Jerusalem. I used to go sometimes to La Casa, so I know David. That I know you are the rabbi of him. So, well, I know a lot of, I listen a lot about you, and I want to know you. In the last Rosh Chodesh, I went to Machpelah in Hebron with
Yes.
So, well, that's my history. To stay, I'm very happy to stay here in Israel. So I hope we can join and know you.
Well, so I hope we'll all be blessed by knowing each other, and for Bezat Hashem will continue next week at 9. But if there's any other issues or things, if you have my my email is ynagen, YNAGEN @gmail.com. So if there are any issues or questions or anything, feel free, even if it's not Sunday at 9 p.m., you're very welcome. And many blessings on the journey. And we spoke a little bit earlier, sometimes the bureaucracy making Aliyah is very challenging. So you have strength to overcome the many obstacles that you may have to face in this journey.
Gershon, Ajax is the winner. Do you say no?
What? What did you say?
What?
I say in Ajax is the winner. Do you say no?
Right. Yinon is learning. Okay, sorry. Okay. Many blessings. All the best. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.